Good evening, it's Joyful Christian Hermit. Well, I did a video earlier. I've been doing videos and I upload them and then they just never upload. They'll get like this 30%. This one was 64% and for several hours just stayed at 64% and wasn't going to go any further. So I just had to cancel that video. So I'll just give a brief recap of it. This summer marks 30 years since I became a Catholic, and I'm recalling a lot of that. I was so deeply in love. I had never loved anything or anyone as much as I loved the Catholic Church. I'm talking about the church that Jesus instituted. I fell in love with the ideal. Everything that I read, the books on spiritual direction, the books on great saints, great spiritual writers, Catholic writers, great converts, church history, the meaning of the Mass and the meaning of the different parts of the Mass. I learned all that. All the sacraments, the 7 sacraments, what they all mean, and other aspects of the history and the evolvement, but always the meaning. So I wasn't just learning externals, but I had to learn the externals. I had the faith, but then had to learn the externals. I already had the faith from 44 years of being Protestant. I'd already fallen in love with Jesus. I already was having mystical experiences all my life. I didn't recognize them as such. I didn't know. I just thought everyone perceived in the same way, had the same kind of dreams and the same kind of inner nudgings and inner sight and inner senses on matters and foresight and etc. And then I think it was as I was getting my divorce and separated, that a friend told me, she was a Protestant friend. We all love you, but do you realize you're different than all of us? And that really upset me. I didn't let on to her. But I had met Dr. H because he was helping my children just with minor divorce adjustments at the time. They hadn't had much visitation with their dad yet, so we didn't get into any of the more horrible stuff. But, I told him, I thought, oh my goodness, I'm crazy. What's wrong with me, Because my husband, when he left a letter, said he never liked my mysticism. I was unfamiliar with the word. I looked it up in the dictionary, but it didn't really tell me much. Still didn't understand what he was bothered by or what it was. I knew I had unusual experiences. I just thought other people did. I knew he didn't, but, I figured other people who were more Christian or whatever had them. Just people not like him had experiences, but and sort of laughed them off as just, odd little things, having poltergeists and demonic experiences, but also having unusual, miraculous experiences and things like that. Knowing things were happening, such as with the husband at the time, which freaked him out because he was doing bad stuff. And I would be shown things, but I didn't connect it with him specifically. So of course he didn't like it. He wrote he didn't like that part of me. Yeah, I was picking up on him, on the bad things and the bad person he was. but not directly, just things around that were happening. And I would describe something, not knowing that he was involved. So, and dreams. And I had an uncanny sense with him of, I would find us houses that were good buys and good locations and get a good price. And I'd work with the bank and make the arrangements and do all that. And that's how we developed money, which he got half. He wasn't talented with. I thought it was just somehow I knew how to do these things and he didn't. I don't know how I knew. I didn't connect it. I knew that God helped me. Obviously, I knew that. And I was very religious and loved God. I thought he did. He went to church. He said he'd always gone to church and had been a youth group director. None of it was true. He'd gone to church maybe a little with his parents, but definitely not on his own. And he never did again after he left me. So, it was just a put on. He did whatever he thought to win me. And then when it wasn't fun anymore, tricking me and cheating and lying, and I was on to him, then he wanted out. He wanted his freedom. Didn't want to be found out. I finally knew him and wasn't falling for it anymore. Wasn't affected. I wasn't fooled. And I lived and took care of the children and did my work, and he was just sort of there. I loved him as a husband, but I didn't trust him. How could I? So, that wasn't fun anymore. He didn't have me fooled. But but Dr. H, when I went to him, I was already separated, and he made an appointment at 6 a.m. and said, something's wrong with me. I must be crazy. I was upset, very upset with what my friend told me, how I was different. I never liked being said I was different. That was something that really was the worst thing anyone could tell me. So he asked lots of questions and then explained, no, there's nothing wrong with you. In fact, he says it's special. He says you have unusual spiritual gifts. He says a lot of them are beyond what I'm familiar with or know. But I was Lutheran at the time, so I tried to get help there. People started noticing more because when my divorce, it became more, God was opening me up. I started having visions. I didn't know what they were called. Locutions, I didn't know what they were called. Lots of forewarnings of things. More than premonitions, they were actual, being shown things in a dream or hear an inner voice speaking, and it would happen then. So I remember one time we had some man visiting. He was a district bishop or something of the Lutheran Church. And I called and asked if I could talk to him. And I asked him if he knew anything of this sort. And he got really sort of curt with me. And he says, I don't know about it, and you don't either. And you'd better stop messing with it, I wasn't doing anything. All these things were happening to me. It was opening up. But then God kept calling me into the Catholic Church. It took him 10 years before I'd finally agreed. He'd shown me a priest I was to meet with 2 years prior to when I finally had the nerve to make an appointment. And when I talked to that priest, he says, tell me everything about you. Because I said, I'm different. I've got this weird thing. And it's, I don't understand it. and I can't find anyone to help me other than, a psychologist said it was a rare spiritual gifts. So I told him some of the things. And he says, well, you're a mystic. He says, the church is filled with mystics. You'll be welcome here. You'll have many of your type here. He sort of waved his arm over to the church building itself. We were in his office next door. The church is filled with people like you. You'll be welcome here. Oh boy, I'm going to meet people who won't think I'm different, and they'll be like me and be able to help me. And he says, you'll be welcomed. You'd be accepted here. Well, no, I haven't been. And it wasn't long until I was shown things about that priest. He ordered me. He explained to me that he'd be my spiritual director. You were always to tell everything to your spiritual director. All of your mystical experiences, anything that I had of dreams to tell. Well, I started having dreams about him. The Virgin Mary was not pleased with this priest. And then I found out about this big gambling thing he had going on the side, making $2 to $3 million a year. He kept it in a little secret account. He used it to help this guy was a young writer from another country who was very charming and very popular. His books were rather banal, but he went around speaking in this country, making lots of money. He became very popular. And this priest wanted to go along with him, wanted to be important. So he used a lot of the money to help promote this young man and to get to go along. And he could be one of the speakers at his conferences and celebrate the masses and be a hot shot. And he used a lot of the poor people's and the bingo addicted, the gambling addicted people. It was serious gambling. It wasn't just little old ladies playing for a candy bar. I went and checked it out. He tried to tell me that was what it was, but no, it was horrific. So that was one thing. And then I would talk to him and I would tell him what I was shown, thinking, he would change. That because Virgin Mary told me things to tell him. One time, if he didn't stop the bingo hall, this big operation he had in the next county was illegal in our county. So he had this big building built in the next county. And it's like a big industrial building. And that's where they had the bingo every night. And 700 to 800 people filled in there, spending all their earnings, poor people and elderly people who were addicted. But one time the Virgin Mary told me that she would thwart him. She would thwart him if he did not stop. And I told him that. I was so naive, so honest, telling him how the Virgin Mary was very upset, and that made him angry. So it just went on and on. Different things I was shown that the priest didn't like then. He became very angry with me, disliked me terribly. So no, I wasn't accepted. But I met my spiritual father, this old priest from Ireland. And he became like he was a spiritual father to me for years and years. For, 24 years. I've been Catholic 30 years now, and 6 years ago he passed away. And I hung in because of him, my spiritual father. He was real. He was so honest and true. A true blue Christian. But anyway, so I realize it's been 30 years since I've been Catholic. I was deeply in love. I fell fully in love with the Catholic Church. From everything I had read for the 10 years that God kept wooing me into the Catholic Church. I did a lot of reading, a lot of praying. Finally, I went to a Mass, and I was gone. I was sold. I was in love. I hadn't ever experienced anything so glorious as a Catholic Mass. And I became, I knew God wanted me to. I asked him, even the night before, up to the night before of my confirmation, Lord, is this really what you want of me? And Jesus appeared and said, yes, yes, for this pleases me very much. And I heard just like bells ring, peals of laughter and joy. Of Jesus was so pleased. Yes, of course. And he showed me this long corridor, all that I would learn, and peaceful and quiet, beautiful corridor went on forever, for eternity. And I wanted that very much. And I became Catholic. And very, very deeply so, very devout. But it wasn't long that the priest didn't want me there. He even said, he's like the HOA man. He held his stomach and he said, you make me sick to my stomach. He would yell at me. That's the one that nearly hit me. He raised his hand. He was going to bring it right down on me. And it was because this little girl I was helping, her dad had neck surgery. I always picked her up then to take her to Mass and bring her home at night. She loved to go to weekday Masses, weeknight. She was in 3rd grade. And I got to know the family and helped them out. And his dad asked little Amanda to ask me to bring communion to him after Tuesday evening Mass. So I was a Eucharistic minister by then. The assistant priest arranged that, taught me, approved me to be a Eucharistic minister. So I had my pyx and I got communion to take it to this man who had his neck surgery and also was driving his little girl home that night. And the priest became enraged that I was taking him communion. And he chased me around the church. I couldn't walk fast, but he had long legs. And he locked up the doors, and I was stuck. And so I tried to get out a side door. He was after me. He was angry, the priest was, because I was going to take communion to this little girl's dad. And he resented me. The priest by then had really resented me. But God already had an angel, 2 angels had this priest, and were going to work with him. And the angels took me off the assignment with the priest. So I was already knew that I was staying clear of that priest. He could not stand me. He said I made him pull his hair out. Well, I had a religious sister who was a godmother at the time, and I told her how he'd yelled at me and said how I made him sick to his stomach and that I made him pull his hair out. And she laughed and she says, well, he doesn't have much to pull out, does he? And he didn't. He was an older man, an older priest, but no, I ended up having to leave that parish. Other priests told me, you've got to get out of here. instead of these priests going to that priest and saying, knock it off, this woman is very devout. She was a Eucharistic minister. All she was doing was taking communion to this man. Just because they didn't ask for you, he was busy all the time with his bingo operations, with his other sideline businesses getting money. So, no, he became very, very resentful of me. He wanted me out of, I had all these questions. I was so inflamed with love of the church. And after I became Catholic, then he didn't want to bother with me. It was like, oh, well, I've got her in the church. I've done my part. But I kept having questions. I would have visions, or I would have a locution that I would want an answer from. And he'd also told me I wasn't to tell people about my situation. So I had asked him, who else was I going to ask? He was still considered himself my spiritual director. So he told the secretary, well, get her lined up to go visiting because since I couldn't do anything regularly, but when I felt okay, I could go visit the shut-ins, take them communion. So he thought, oh, good, keep her busy. But then one time he got bothered because they wanted to see me, the shut-ins did. So that made him angry. He went to visit a man once, and the man said, and well, I know this because of the church secretary. The priest went back and was having quite a fit, and she would call me and warn me when not to come to church, that I would be in big trouble because he was on the warpath against me. But this man had said to the priest, well, said my name to come. I wanted her to come. And I stopped going because it was getting too tricky. And that was sad because the people missed me then, because I would go and spend time with them, take them communion, talk with them. They got sort of a kick out of it. I'd have to lay on the floor. Here was somebody who was unwell like them. And I had a true zeal for the faith. And we'd talk about the church. So those days were my best days before I got kicked out of the first parish, before all hell broke out loose against me. And then some of the hoo-hoos, who were his right-hand people, he had a couple of the men given orders that if I came and stepped foot on the premises, I would be kicked out. So that was horrible. I just had never experienced anything like that. I even asked the police department. I called and asked them, is it legal, say if you go to a church, I didn't want to say what church. I didn't want to make the Catholics seem bad. So I said, if you go to a church and the pastor, called him a pastor, didn't say priest. If the pastor has two men assigned that if you step foot on the property, they are to bodily remove you. I just was wondering, is this normal? Is this legal? To have two men remove me from church grounds. And the policeman said, who I talked to on the phone, I didn't say who I was. I just wanted to find out. And the policeman says, the better question is, why would you go to a church where they treat you like that? Where they say that they're going to physically remove you from church grounds. I mean, he asked me questions. Well, are you a member there? Have you done something wrong, bad? No. So that was the first parish. A priest from a nearby town had heard about how this priest couldn't stand me. And so he told me, you need to stop going there. So I switched churches, went to a different one in my hometown. That priest had even more problems, different problems, but more. The one involved with another priest, homosexuals. That just didn't stop. And that's when I didn't know that at first. Got the soup kitchen going, the Virgin Mary. That isn't all of it. That it was worse, more things in between that, before the soup kitchen, but I really got myself into trouble I fell so in love, and then I was just brokenhearted with all that I would find out. But it was people thing, it was priests, and then I had this godmother at the convent. Then I found out about her and a lot of the sisters, that they were all not really into their charism at all. They were anti-church. They wanted to destroy the church, destroy what the church stood for. I had fully understood, and I trusted Jesus in the priesthood. Totally understood it. I still do. Jesus explained. I understood it. I saw how the Virgin Mary is the most powerful woman ever created, and fell in love with Mary, learned from Mary how I'm her maidservant. Even now, I'm her maidservant. Learning to serve. And I never wanted to be powerful or anything like that. No, just to serve, just to help, just to love, visit people, develop programs, use my gifts and talents to help build up the parish. But no, that wasn't wanted. And a lot of the people were suspicious of me. I came off, I guess somehow they sensed I was different. But there were some very lovely people, and I tend to forget about them, I have to say. So I have been reflecting. I thought it's 30 years. And the last time I was able to go to Mass before the ecstasy started occurring during Mass was back in August of 2008. The ecstasies began at Mass the last weekend of August in 2008. About the last day of August, in fact, it was, when it really hit. It built up for a couple of weeks ahead of time. My guardian angel had come to me in a dream, told me that he was going to lead me to the stairway to heaven. And a couple of weeks later was when those ecstasies began, and they grew and grew in intensity, but within 2 weeks they were strong enough that I didn't have capacity, didn't have function of my limbs, my extremities, and wasn't conscious during Mass, but I was so there. And at first, this Reverend Monsignor, by then I was at, I don't know, maybe my 6th church by then, my 6th parish. And things had gone very well there. At first they weren't, because they thought I was some horrible person that they'd heard about from my hometown. But then when I was shown about this one priest. It was a priest that was expendable. They wanted to get him out. So they were very pleased. And that priest told them how I knew. Through supernatural means. He told them the truth. Because he was all excited about it. Even though he'd been in moral depravity, he still thought that was just really great, Wow, that's how I knew about him. So, but it all turned on me then. The ecstasies, which I couldn't help. First they thought, oh, wow, this is... But after a while, the Reverend Monsignor, who has obsessive compulsive disorder, couldn't cope with it because I was out of order. I wasn't standing during the gospel. That really got to him because it's not in order. He has to have everything in order. Externals. Talk about being very external. That's an obsessive compulsive disorder of externals. He used to tidy everything up, all the bulletins, things after Mass. It's a problem. I felt sorry for him. But he took it out on me. It wasn't my fault I had the ecstasies. I couldn't stop them. I couldn't start them. It took me a while before I knew what they were. Holy Spirit gave me a vision of a book I was to look at. I was one of the books on my shelf. Hadn't ever read it. But in that book, Mystical Phenomenon, by the Monsignor Albert Farge, I learned about mystical ecstasies, and it answered all my questions, because by then I'd been having them for over 2 months. Every single Mass. And they were getting deeper and deeper. So, and I don't know, I haven't been since before 2019. I had my back surgery, the real serious back surgery, so I'm trying to think when I went to Mass. I came here. I would go different places, and I learned to ask the priest ahead of time. And some would say, oh, yes, you're welcome, but then they wouldn't like it because parishioners would ask about it or something. And I just looked like I was asleep. But if they touched me or tried to waken me, I can't waken. So you have to look up about ecstasies. God takes you with him. You're out of your body. You don't have control over your arms and your hands and your eyes and your mouth. And you can't talk. You can't. The more they mess with you, you come back in, but you still don't have use of your external faculties. Not until God releases you, brings you back fully. It's all God's will. The going and the coming back in. And the going is blissful. I didn't have any pain during any of the ecstasies, except for 2 or 3 in which I was in hell. I was shown hell. And it had to do with people that I was shown who were in hell or going to be in hell, who were very displeasing to the Lord. One was a priest on the island who bastardized the Mass. That one, I was finally able, I struggled and struggled to get out and to leave. And my spiritual father said, never go back there until they have a new priest, a different priest. Don't ever go back. Because he knew it was horrific for me to be in hell, to experience the Mass bastardized like that. Because in ecstasy in a Mass, you become one with the Mass. I became the Mass, and the Mass became me. We were one. In union with God, in union with the Mass. The ecstasy has you in union with God. And it was the closest to my death experience. But so that was that. They finally got a new priest, but he couldn't handle it. So, and the people couldn't at all. They didn't like it. It was small parish. Word spread. No, you would think, that they would at least be interested, or no, they turn. They either become very envious, the women tend to. On occasion, a man will also. But no, they don't like something different. They don't like something spiritual going on. And then also they doubt, and they start putting you through. They anoint themselves as the devil's advocate. And they decide that you're faking, and they put you through hell. Then. And then in the cathedral, I kept getting injured. So I wore a sign. Even that didn't work. That was when I about had my neck broken. That's why my neck is extra bad now. So with that, then my spiritual father said, well, don't go back there. Plus, it bothered Reverend Monsignor terribly. He was becoming very mean to me. Very mean. And the bishop, too. He wanted to be my spiritual director, and was for just a few months. And it was too much for him. It upset him, these spiritual experiences. He'd put his head in his hands. Too much to grasp. I can't grasp it. And he didn't want to meet with me anymore then. So a lot of abandonment, a lot of rejection. Even this couple that I thought were my best friends and their children. I considered their children, as if my children also, and I haven't heard from them ever since I left, for a little while, but no. I think the man admitted he had been envious. He admitted before I left and said how sorry he was, that once he realized all that I was being put through and how people turned on me, that he realized he would never want that. So it's a lot of rejection. One woman in particular, she was very outward about it. When I would come in, she would point at me and do the crazy sign, grab other people in the pews and go, look, and go like that and point at me and just glare at me. And then it got to the point that if I remained, because I thought my spiritual father said, just ignore. But then she'd walk out in anger. She'd make a scene of it, walking out, and point at me as she would go, and mouth, it's her fault, and she's sick, or she's of the devil. So, and in the end, the bishop mocked me about it, and he truly did to my face. I went to his home to talk with him because he never spoke to me again. He wouldn't answer calls. I would write to him. He wouldn't respond. No one told me he wasn't going to be my director anymore. I kept trying to make an appointment, and the secretary would just put me off. That went on for several months. So I finally went to his home. I thought, I want to find out from him why he's totally rejected me. And it was cruel what he said. Just I don't know, so it was a constant battle. I mean, at the time I could rationalize and say that the devil was trying to get to me and to keep me from going to Mass. So I would just keep trying other parishes. It got to the point where priests would just outright tell me ahead of time, no, you can't come here. One was very nice. He says, you're lovely, you're a mystic. Well, first he asked me lots of questions. He said, how do you know these things? Oh, I knew things all about the diocese. The Lord let me know things. I was always on assignments for God. He revealed anything that was not right that he wanted me to suffer for. So yes, God does have us suffer for things. This other lady doesn't understand suffering, not mystical suffering, because she's writing in her blog, that it isn't that way, that God doesn't give us suffering. Oh yes, he does. If you work for God, if you're on assignment, if you're one of his victim souls, that he asked me to suffer. And of course, when Jesus asked, and Jesus raised me up, this was the summer, 30 years ago, in fact, it was this month, 30 years ago. He lifted me up, put my left ear up against his bleeding side, and let the blood trickle down into my ear while he said, "Listen to my blood." And he said more. I wrote it down. It's like a poem, but I just wrote it all out, what he told me, after he let me back down, obviously, from his cross. So he didn't even have to say words. I knew I was one with Christ's suffering. So I've been asking, I'm reflecting 30 years now. Why did God bring me into his church? And what does he want of me now? What has he ever wanted of me? To be in his church. Because I'm not even really in it. That's the thing. I don't even bother trying anymore. When I first moved here, I went and talked. The regular priest he was on vacation. So I talked to the assistant priest. And he says, "No, don't come." He says, "I'm sorry to say this." He says, "But it's like if you had Tourette's. We couldn't have something like that going on during Mass." And I said, "Well, I just looked like I'm asleep. There's never a sound. It just looks like I'm deeply asleep." My couple friend at least told me that much, that my head was down, I'm slumped down, and not moving at all. In fact, one time at the cathedral back in the Midwest, a doctor was visiting, and he thought I had died, and he was working on me, and I had big bruises in my jugulars. The next day I got my hair cut, and the gal who cut my hair was saying, "Oh my goodness, what happened to your neck? It looks like someone was strangling you." And I said, "Oh yes, I was strangled at Mass," and just laughed like it was a big joke. And that put her off. She laughed and, knew I was just saying something, but she didn't pursue it. But, yeah. But that time, my friends did tell me they got him off of me. He was behind me. I could tell because it brought me back in. I resented it. I didn't want to have the intrusion. I wanted to be with God, in union with God. And if somebody was touching me, or if someone with the devil in them walked by me on the way to communion, I would smell that devil scent, and it would disrupt the bliss. But I knew God wanted me to pray for that soul, the one that had the devil in him. Or her, could be a woman. One time it was a woman, and she attacked me after Mass. That time the Reverend Monsignor knew, and it was connected with a young man that he had asked me to pray for, who had come back to that Mass for the first time. And he saw this old lady sitting across from him in the back of the church, and wondered about that old lady. He had never seen her before, and was suspicious. Sure enough, she was of the devil. After Mass, leaving, she had physically assaulted me in the pew, nearly broke my hand. And that time, too, a couple of people pulled her off. See, the cathedral, a lot of the people were getting used to, except for the one lady who was always going to be awful. But the people around me, other people, they sensed then, they figured it out, something spiritual was going on. And they were very respectful. A handful of them were. They weren't hurting me. They weren't kicking at me or shoving at me or shaking me, because I didn't go up to communion. I didn't need communion. I was in communion. I was in union. See, that bothered Reverend Monsignor too. And for quite a while, my own spiritual father kept trying to figure it out until he read something by Dom Marmion, Blessed Marmion. It was about 4 years later, and he wrote to me. I was on the island by then. And he said, I've always tried to figure that out. Why it was that you didn't have to have communion, and why you didn't have communion. Why God would have you in Mass and not receive the Eucharist. He says, Dom Marmion explained it. You're in the Eucharist. You are in God so much. You are receiving. You don't need it on top of being in union with God. See, when we're in heaven and in union with God, we're not going to need any externals. We don't need his real body and blood. We have become it. See, I had been subsumed into the Mass, every single Mass. But when the regular priest here came back and he says, oh, no. He says, it's not. He says, I'm sorry. He says, we wouldn't treat you like that. It's not that you don't have Tourette's. Not at all. Well, no, I didn't. But, I suppose it would be difficult if there were a child, or the assistant minister had used a child as an example. If a child had Tourette's, we'd ask the parents to keep them home or in the cry room. But this priest, oh no, this is fine. He says, in fact, I seems like I read that Teresa of Avila had ecstasies. And so he showed me where I could be, in a room by myself, far, far away from the Eucharist, from the tabernacle, not with the body of Christ. Well, and it had a screen in there. He says, see, it has a live stream of the Mass. I didn't need a live stream. I realized, why be there? And they were padded seats on top of it, padded chairs in that room. They had some wood pews in the main church, but I wasn't allowed to be there. So it was the same thing, So, and it wasn't just that. Even though I went to the room for, a year. A year I went to the room. I had 2 surgeries in between them, in there, in that time period. But the priest started to be bothered by me, even after, when I would come out of the room after Mass. He didn't want to shake my hand. He didn't want to speak to me. And he started to do his squinting and this and that. And I knew all the signals. I'd been there so many times before. When I had moved to the island, that didn't work out. I went to various parishes on the mainland, making an appointment with the priest ahead of time to explain. Had my little sign, please do not touch. Meditating. It was advised back in the Midwest to use the word meditating. Don't say ecstasy. Oh no, don't say the truth. Be ashamed, I guess. But they're so worried. They get so worried that you're going to get a big head when all you get is abuse. If you have spiritual experiences, you'll be abused. And you can consider it being tested, but for me, it's just gone on all the time. It never stopped. From 2008 on. So 2020, by then I'd had 4 surgeries. Yeah, it was 4. So I'd missed a lot in between anyway, because the one was a year recovery. The spine surgery was in 2019. I hadn't had the knee replacement yet. That was the only one I hadn't had. So I'd had 4 other surgeries. I'd missed a lot anyway. And it was just pointless. Then during COVID, then they had mass online. And I thought, why bother? Why go and make my back worse sitting on those padded chairs in their little room? So far from the tabernacle. At least in the Midwest, I got to sit in the handicap pew, right up close to Jesus, close to the altar. It was heaven when I was in those ecstasies, true heaven. But they couldn't handle it, and they knew me the best there. They knew me very, very well. Bishop knew me. Oh, you saved our church, you saved. Well, I saved them from lawsuits by letting them know about the one priest. There were others, but they didn't care about those. The one that was bringing in so much money and his boyfriend. So the temporal church, we are all imperfect human beings. It's no reason to leave a church because we are the body of Christ and we are all sinners. None of us is perfect. But as far as being in parishes, then I realized, well, a traditional historic hermit would not be in a parish. They weren't. They were out in the desert. They didn't belong to parishes. They had nothing to do with the temporal Catholic world. Not with dioceses, not with parishes, not with anything of the world. And that included the church world, because the church has developed its own world. I don't care if it's Protestant or what religion, they all have their temporal worlds. And in part, they have to have structure. The larger it is, the more people, the more organization they need. Just legitimately, truly. It's grown since Jesus' time. So there's certain protocols and needs. Well, people, want to have a roof over their head in the snowstorms and the rain. And that costs, and that takes organization, takes structure, temporal structures, priests, secretaries, custodians to clean the facilities, on and on. Now they even have parish nurses they hire, usually someone who's connected, a hoo-hoo. In the parishes I've been in, these were the parish nurses. The one was a very wealthy woman who used to be a nurse, but hadn't worked in years and years because she was married to a very wealthy man, and he was on parish council. So she got the job as parish nurse and took a salary. It was part-time. She only wanted to work part-time, so it's just part-time parish nurse. And I one time called her, and it was pointless. She was just a figurehead. She didn't do anything as a parish nurse. She put in a little column in the bulletin every week. That was all. She did nothing nurse-wise for anyone. Just took her salary, part-time salary. And her husband was well off, and he was on the parish council. And then, let's see, another one, her husband was a deacon, so she got the job as parish nurse. And she set up different exercise programs for the elderly. After morning masses, weekday masses, she would have a little exercise program, chair exercises and things. So, and then she would put things in the bulletin of health interest, how to eat healthy and what to do if you had certain symptoms. And especially during COVID, she would write things about COVID. Make sure you wear your mask and things. See, there was another parish. Forget how that parish nurse had a connection. But she had a connection. I never found a parish that the parish nurse really did much of anything as far as hands-on. And, but I will say at this one that she did at least have the exercise program after morning mass. I think Monday, Wednesday, Friday or something. Chair exercises for the elderly. The young at heart, I think she called them. So, and they had a meal program. If you had a surgery and were alone, had no one to cook for you, they would bring a meal on Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday, I think 3 times a week. One meal in the evening. 3 different people would volunteer to bring a meal for 1 week. It didn't matter how serious the surgery. So I had this surgery that was ultra serious, the spine surgery, year recovery. I had no one. At that point in time, the daughter here was very upset with me and wasn't going to help with anything. So, in fact, I had to get myself to the hospital for the surgery. So she did show up there later, and it shook her up because they had trouble getting me out of anesthetic. I wasn't breathing after. So that upset her. She knew something was wrong. Got to be late. So she found me in ICU. It's called post-op ICU. And they had her come in and try to help them get me to breathe. And that really upset her to see me so bad. So that helped, but not enough to have her bring me any food. But the nurse did say, well, since your surgery is going to be, she didn't know I had all that trouble, but arranged it ahead of time. They allowed me 2 weeks. In fact, I think it was Tuesday and Thursday they were bringing it. But the first person who came saw how bad off I was in here and had no one. My neighbor didn't live there then. But a family lived there. And those kids, I did hire them to do my ice machine twice a day. And the dad helped too. But they had a huge family. They didn't bring me any food or anything. They had more than enough they had to deal with all those children. So, but the nurse did decide and allowed it. But the first person realized, so she put the word out, and the ones who were bringing the food brought enough for 2 meals for me. So that would get me through 4 days, because it was twice a week they would bring something. And she extended it for 2 weeks instead of just 1 week. But I called and begged. And the people themselves decided to do it a 3rd week for me, which was very kind of them. But it was pretty stringent. They weren't, see me, if there was somebody in bad shape and needed meals, I would make sure the person got them. It wouldn't be just 1 week. Wouldn't be twice in 1 week. It wouldn't be twice in 2 weeks. It would be until they needed. Then it got to the point, well, I'd stocked up on groceries, but I didn't realize the complications I was going to have. So, when they said a year recovery, well, yeah, I'm tough, I can do this. No, I couldn't. So I called the nurse. Don't you have neighbors that can help you? I needed a prescription once. My daughter had agreed to get my prescriptions because they were morphine. But she was gone. She was traveling by then. So I called and said, is there anyone there in the church who could pick up my prescription at Walmart for me? Nope. I said, even a secretary, anyone in the church offices, would they be willing? This one time, please. I need this medicine. It's pain medicine. Nope, no one can do it. We're all busy. They call me back. They say, well, there's this woman. I found out through the grapevine, though, that she has always wanted a job at the church. But they don't want her because they don't like her personality. So they've kept her out. But they thought, we'll sick her on this sick lady, the lady with the surgery. So she called me. She says, well, we've got this one woman who would be great. She'd do it for you. Here's her number. Well, they didn't tell me that she expected 20 hours a week, paid at $20 an hour. I didn't need anyone. I didn't have 20 hours a week times $20 times 4 weeks. That was my whole monthly income before taxes is out. I didn't have anything for her to do. And she got on the phone. She said she'd cook for. I said, I don't need all that. I said, I eat very little. I just need someone one time until my daughter gets back to get me my prescription from Walmart. Oh, my husband's manager of that Walmart. He's there right now. She would not get it for me. She would not get her husband to bring it. She wanted me to hire her, agree to 20 hours a week at $20 per hour. I said, I don't have that money. That's my monthly income, and I don't have work for you to do. I don't need food cooked for me. Don't need meals. Not at that price. I didn't say that, but that was the truth. I grange eat. I don't even remember what I had tonight. Then I have a peach later. So I had eggs earlier in the day. So anyway, that was how that went. So no, I'm trying to remember who got my medicine for me. Who did it for me? I don't even remember who I got. It might have been one of the people who had brought me meals before. I think it might have been an older couple. But see, it gets tricky. It gets difficult, doesn't it? Being Christian takes some work. Takes love, doesn't it? Selflessness. Why couldn't someone in that whole big, it's the largest church, largest parish in the state. Something like 13,000 members. They have huge offices. They have so many people working there. They have people on the payroll for about everything. None of those people, they said, could go to Walmart and bring me one time a prescription. That said a lot to me right there. That we're talking people who don't know love and compassion, and tried to stiff me with this woman who once wanted her employment, 20-hour a week at $20 an hour, or she wouldn't do a thing for me. I offered her to pay her $20 to get it one time, which was a lot. But I mean, it wasn't, considering, it was probably 5 times the gas or 10 times the gas would have cost her, but she didn't live far from me. Or her husband could have brought the medicine. Being manager. But, well, he would have needed my driver's license legally, so guess there's that complication. But $20 would have been okay. I would have done it for free for anyone. That's just how I am, but I was reared that way. I was a Methodist and in a small town, but I think it was just how people were. Maybe it was the 50s. But my family and other families did things for one another without cost, without expecting pay, especially if they were sick or suffering. Unless they didn't have money, if they couldn't afford gas to go get the medicine, yes, then they should take it. But so that wasn't the reason I didn't bother going back. Oh, it was then COVID happened, and then I thought, why am I driving over there, driving to that parish, then just to sit in a room so far from the tabernacle and just have a screen there, which doesn't matter to me anyway. Just stay home. Because they were putting it on. They stopped having people come to Mass anyway. So that's when I stopped. 2020. Oh, and also I felt like it was a sign from God. I had gone to my final, it was a Monday morning Mass. They have coffee and donuts afterwards. I went in. People waved me over immediately. I sit down and they're talking about opioids and how addictive they are and how terrible are people who take them. And I had just recovered. I'd had my pump surgery October 20th, and I was finally healed enough because I had complications from the pump surgery. Arachnoiditis complications, which will happen anytime they put anything into the spinal cord, be it an injection or this time it was a tube. So I had all kinds of eating issues. So it's my first time out, went to that Mass on a Monday morning, because it wouldn't be as long a sitting also. And there was this conversation. And all I could think of is I would be tarred and feathered out of here if they knew the person there with them had a pump with Dilaudid flowing through it all the time. Because they were going on. One of the man's wife had shingles, and the doctor had given her, I think, 3 days of Vicodin to take, low dose, hydrocodone. And she refused to take it, and her husband wouldn't let her take it also, convinced she would be addicted immediately. So she hadn't slept day and night for 3 days, pacing because of the pain. I thought, good luck. I wanted to tell them about my aunt. She's deceased now, but she refused to take, she had terrible sciatica. She was 89. This woman was elderly, and her husband. And everybody at the table were in agreement. Oh, yeah, you'll be addicted within 3 days. Don't ever let her even take one. She'll get addicted. It'll be bad. It'll be bad. Oh, they do terrible things to you. And there I am with a pump plus taking oral meds. So, I thought, no, I wouldn't be welcome here if they knew. I would be castigated, an addict in their minds. But my aunt had a massive stroke because she was so afraid to take a pain pill. Her pain got so bad, it raised her blood pressure and she had a massive stroke. She nearly died. She had to relearn to speak, to walk. She couldn't read ever again. Lost so much of her eyesight from the stroke. And didn't speak the same. It was garbled. Could barely walk. She had to always then have someone live with her the rest of her life. For the next 8 years, she had to have a live-in because she was afraid that she would get addicted. Yeah, pain is powerful. Pain will, if your pain is bad, it raises your blood pressure, especially in an older person. Good luck if you refuse, and if your pain's bad enough. And the shingles pain, for her, that lady to be pacing and not sleeping 3 days and 3 nights already. But what can you do? You know, people are so indoctrinated now. So anyway, that I thought, this isn't my place. So I went to the cathedral here, talked to the priest. Nope, don't come here. I don't want you here. He looked at me and treated me like I was some kind of a faking freak, you know, wanting attention or something. It just gets old. And so it just seemed like God was saying no, especially like when they wouldn't even get my prescription medicine one time for me. That was sad. That was so sad. And she wouldn't extend the meal thing either. That was it. So one person brought me an extra couple of days feeling bad. But it wasn't up to one person to do it all. So the lady who brought me communion, she didn't care to help. She was very, very wealthy. She had a son, but he was in college. So it wasn't as if, you know, it's just how people are. Just, you know, we have to learn to love and help one another. It's only temporary. It wasn't for life that I was going to need a meal now and then to get through that horrific surgery. Then by the time the pump surgery, my daughter brought me food and helped out, brought me protein drinks to drink and things. Well, that I was told it wasn't that bad, but of course I had a reaction, so had eating issues from the arachnoiditis itself, reacting to the irritation in the spinal cord from the tube being put in. So that's when I started realizing that God's hermits, the desert hermits, were not in parishes, that I had been the one pushing on doors that weren't meant to open for a hermit. So then I understood it was all well and good. God had to use extreme measures with these people to have me step back and then think through, you know, why? So now I'm reflecting, what is it God wants of me in the church? So I know suffering is one big thing. To suffer in union with Christ and to offer my suffering for the church. Pray for the church, obviously. But I'm not at all associated with it in any temporal way. And the desert hermits weren't either. So that doesn't bother me anymore. But I do just sort of wonder, because so much emphasis is placed on the temporal church. That's what people think of. Those of you who are parishioners somewhere, that's probably your reference point, is the building and going to the temporal mass and the things you do there, and activities if you're in any activities. But just knowing some of you who leave comments, you guys would have brought me meals. I know you would have. You wouldn't have even known me, and you would have seen my situation. And it wouldn't have been just one extra meal. You would have covered for as long as I needed. Oh, I needed groceries, and see, I didn't realize I wouldn't be able to drive for a long time. So I called the church, called my church. I was a member. Asked, is there anyone there? And I would pay the person who might go to Costco and just load up on some canned goods for me, because I'm still laid up and I can't drive yet. Well, don't you have neighbors that would do that? Well, I only knew one neighbor then. That was the lady with all the children, and she worked from home on top of it. So she didn't have time. And she probably would have. They were Mormon. Mormons are really into service. This neighbor I have now wants to do everything for me. I had to say, wait, I'm capable now. I'm not sick anymore. Got to do my own. I'm not pathetic. I'm not weak. I got to get those images out of my mind and not have her view me as such, as someone that she needs to take care of all the time. I'm getting soft, I've got to toughen up here and do my own, which she's letting me, So once I brought it up, that I've got to do these things. So, no, they didn't have. Well, finally they called back. Well, there is a man here, and he doesn't go to this church, but he works at the food pantry, and he seems very nice. I.e., there's no one nice in the church who would do it for you. It's true. They wouldn't have, and they didn't. So this man did, and I paid him for doing it, even though he goes once a week, he said. But he ended up criticizing me, but he wasn't a member there. But he resented going for me because I wasn't bedridden. It's amazing how people assume things, see. Just because I wasn't bedridden doesn't mean that the surgeon had allowed me to drive yet. So finally, if I needed anything little, my daughter would pick it up now and then. But she's gone a lot. See, people assume your family's going to do things for you. But she was recently just gone for over 3 weeks. 3 weeks and 2 days, So, and my neighbor used to think, well, why doesn't your family? But she understands. She's working all the time, crazy hours, and gone away from the area. Cannot do it, but will do it when she's around. And she does help me when she's around. And would, especially if I was having surgeries. That all has gotten in better between us. She's not as, she's burned out from growing up since she was 6 taking care of me. But she's gotten over it. She's got a new boost of selflessness. She's a very selfless person, actually. But we went through a rough time period. So she was on overload with her marriage at the time, and that's over with, so she doesn't have that stress. So anyway, this is what I'm just reflecting on my situation, and to me, because I love the Catholic Church. I love the ideal. I love the meaning. Everything they do, every sacrament, every motion, every external has meaning that's significant. So it's all beautiful. It's perfection as far as I'm concerned. Except for us humans. We're the problem. And Mormons and Protestants run circles around, at least the parishes I've been in, which is something like maybe 16 or 17 or 18 different ones I've tried. Maybe more. Maybe it's in the 20s now. But I've stopped because I realize I'm a hermit, and hermits were not involved in parishes. And that's another thing about DIocese Hermits and how involved they are with their parishes. That it, to me, it doesn't jive with tradition and history. But anyway, I am praying and praying and asking God what God wills of me in His church and what He wants of me in His church. Because I still have the zeal and the love of Christ and His church. So, sort of an interesting dilemma in a way of how much I love the church and have for 30 years and more. It was 10 years of God wooing me in, but it's been a journey, quite a journey. Well, God bless His real presence in us, and I'll just see what Jesus has to say to me of what He wants and any other reasons why He brought me into His church and what He wants of His church with me in it, but not in parishes. Not at all anything to do with parishes or dioceses, I don't think. Doesn't seem so. But in His ideal, in the ideal of His church, in the spiritual church, the mystical Catholic world, the mystical Christian church, I am referring to it as the Christian church. Because I think reminding myself that I am a Christian is going to help me be more in tune with Jesus Christ. So this is my verbal journal of thoughts. Much love to you all.